Good afternoon, everybody. Phil Armstrong, the project director for the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. Today we wanted to spend some time giving you a kind of behind-the-scenes look at one of our major projects. Since the Centennial Commission was founded and formed by State Senator Kevin Matthews in 2015, we have worked with the community to have various projects, and some of them brick and mortar, some of them education committees, some of them economic development. But where we're standing is one of those pivotal brick and mortar projects, and that is the Greenwood Rising Black Wall Street History Center, an 11,000 square foot facility. The exterior of the building was designed by local architects Seltzer Schaefer, and the interior design, as you'll be listening and as I take you on this small quick tour, the exhibits designed by world-renowned museum design experts, Local Projects. To give you a little bit of their resume, they designed the exhibits for the 9/11 Museum in New York City. And how we were introduced to them is the phenomenal work that we saw that they did for the exhibits in Montgomery, Alabama, with Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative and the Legacy Museum, the history of African Americans from slavery to mass incarceration. And we were just enamored by the way they told a story about a history of a community. And so we worked with them to create what you're going to see here in a couple months. And we heard directly from the community about this facility. Number one, tell the truth. Don't hold back anything when it comes to the massacre. Don't whitewash, don't cover over. Tell the truth in all of its horrific grittiness. But not only that, they specifically said time and time again, don't just focus on the massacre, but talk about all of Greenwood. Talk about the history and the excellence of African Americans in Oklahoma that very few people, unfortunately, were taught here in schools or even universities. How 30, 40, 50, 60 years before Greenwood even got its start with O.W. Gurley, there were these historic all-black towns of Oklahoma that proliferated all through green country, as we call it now today. And we want to tell that history. After the massacre, we want to talk about how this community rebuilt itself and the amazing way they were able to stand their ground and say, we shall not be moved. We own this land. And even though the city and the state of Oklahoma at that time were found to be complicit, did not offer any financial aid or assistance, even though they labeled this a riot, and because of that, black citizens were not able to file their insurance claims, they were still able to pool money together from around the country, from around these black towns, and they rebuilt Greenwood by their own love and their passion, their sweat, of their own brow, and even made it bigger and better economically after 1921 than it was prior to. And then we go into the second decline. What happened to Greenwood after the 1940s and 50s and 60s? What was the systematic structures in place that caused its second decline? And then finally, we'll talk about the journey to reconciliation, that place of healing for the future, for the hope of this country, this state, this nation that begins right here in this place, Greenwood, ground zero for race relations, right here in Greenwood. And where do we go from here for the next 100 years? So first of all, behind me, to my right, your left, you will see viewports. And these viewports in this open entry gallery, when you come inside, you'll be able to see photos, some of them being still photos and some of them being electronic media, that you'll be able to see what Greenwood used to look like. Some of them will be still shots, some of them will be phasing from what the structure looks like today and then what it looked like back then. And so each of these are placed in different positions because we plan to have a robust educational field trip program. So children in elementary schools will be able to look at their height and look through, and then taller individuals, but viewports to give you just already a caption of Greenwood and its excellence and what it used to look like right when you come inside the building. There will be different types of historical statements. There'll be a land acknowledgement on this wall that where we build this facility used to be owned. This was land that was owned by the Muskogee Creek freedmen, and this particular allotment. So even the history from where we build this structure is history that acknowledges black citizens of Oklahoma, even all the way back to the 5 civilized tribes of Oklahoma. And so this is the viewport wall, and the next thing I want to show you is the entry video room. So let's go check that out. So behind me is a space that's called the intro video room, introduction. Before we start you on the journey to go through the History Center, this will be a room where you'll gather with your docent that will lead you on your tour and talk about the history. And behind me will be a large LED wall that will feature a 5 to 7 minute video, something visually to prepare you for what you're about to see. A visual representation that gets your mind and gets your heart ready for what you're going to experience with this history. And we've used African Americans all through this process, all through even the construction, and even with the media that is being used here. Local African American Trey Thaxton, who's owner of Gold Mill, which is he is an extremely talented young man, and he's leading the team that will create this video. And from the images that I've seen already, it is going to be absolutely incredible. But you will sit here, you'll have a moment to hear the history and an overview, and where you go from here is you'll leave this room, follow your docent, and you'll go to the Spirit of Greenwood, the first gallery experience. So let's go check that out. And so here we're in the first exhibit. This is called the Spirit of Greenwood. These actual first two exhibits that I want to show you fall under that arc of the Spirit of Greenwood. Inside this space, you will actually walk across an authentic fabrication of a representation of railroad tracks, which represents black history in all of America. Anybody who knows very much about black history, especially in the Deep South, you were on the black side of town when you walked across the railroad tracks. The same thing for here in Greenwood, the Frisco Railway that divided South Tulsa or White Tulsa from North Tulsa or Black Tulsa in the 1900s. You'll actually walk across railroad tracks when you come in this room, and you'll learn about the history of Greenwood. Before that, you'll learn about how did black Americans get to Oklahoma in the first place? Where did these all black towns and how they were created, and their excellent way that they were run, from having their own property and land and businesses and haberdasheries, as they call it, and some of them with their own banks like Langston and Boley. And you'll learn about that history. You'll learn what then took place, and that is black boosterism, black citizens telling others to come to Oklahoma. We can pursue our freedom here. Then you get to Greenwood, and you'll learn about the pioneers of Greenwood, from O.W. Gurley to Simon Berry to A.J. Smitherman to Dr. A.C. Jackson, and the list goes on and on. The pioneers that made Greenwood what it was, what it became to be, known as Black Wall Street. You'll learn about this in this first exhibit space. The next space we're going to go to, I'm excited to tell you about. This space is the second portion of the exhibit under the title of the Spirit of Greenwood. Really excited about this particular room, and I know it's hard to visualize, but this will be a dedication to one of two well-known safe spaces in the black community. To this day, and for the history of black America, everyone who studies the history of communities and communalism in urban areas, especially in Oklahoma and around the United States, there are still today two places where African Americans have that trusted safe space, where they love, where they have laughter and dialogue, banter, get their news of the day, their politics of the day, and have this safe environment. And those two places are the black church and the black barbershop or black beauty salon. And so, acknowledging that cultural history in the United States, we're going to have in this exhibit the first ever in any museum or history experience, a black barbershop hologram experience to tell the history of a community. Imagine stepping into a 1920s, 1930s style barbershop and being able to gather in every detail, from the crown molding to the ceiling to the floor, even to the barbershop chairs, that you'll actually be able to sit in. And in the mirror, you will see a few barbers that are standing there, hologram figures, spiritual figures that are talking to you about Greenwood and this wonderful place that was created and that it still exists today, but you'll experience that in a very loving, in a very factual, in a very historical way, told by holograms. And we cannot wait to show you this aspect of Greenwood, the Black barbershop experience, right here at Greenwood Rising. Next, we're going to go to the next portion that takes us into the arc of oppression. And this is where we really start getting into what's leading to the main focal point of this history, and that's the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Let's go. So when you come out of the barbershop experience, the next thing you'll come through is this transitional moment, this transitional space. And you will see and actually have an opportunity to read and prepare you for what you're going to see before you go into this space. This portion of Greenwood Rising is called the Arc of Oppression, specifically referred to as systems of anti-blackness. What does that mean? We take this time to educate all who come here that the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre was not an isolated incident that happened all by itself. There was a steady increase in this racial animosity, in many ways racial jealousy, that continued to increase in a number of ways towards black citizens, not only in Oklahoma, but around the country. And so this takes you on that historical narrative to see what was happening in Oklahoma and even overall in the United States that was leading to this building up and building up and building up of racial animosity until Tulsa in May of 1921 was just this tinderbox. As Hannibal Johnson, the historian and an expert that has written now 10 books on this history and spent 30 years here writing and researching this history, and actually is the lead curator for the Greenwood Rising History Center, as he calls it, a tinderbox, that all it needed was a striking of the match to set it ablaze. And we'll talk about that incident. But this will give you opportunity to let you know what you're about to see visually are going to be very heavy, very emotional, and very visual scenes of history. And we acknowledge that some may not be ready for that. We acknowledge that some parents and their children may not be ready for that. Just like they did in the 9/11 Museum, and local projects advised us, make sure you have places where people, if they're not ready, that they can move to the side and go to a different. And so this will give you that opportunity to acknowledge, maybe my child's not ready for that, maybe I'm not ready for that, and you'll go through a different passageway to get to the next exhibit. But for those that are ready to experience this history, and as the community said, to tell the truth, you'll walk on past behind me to my left, and you'll start going through the historical narratives and the periods of time in our history when there were systems of anti-blackness in place that led to, again, what happened here 100 years ago. Let's go see. So as we come out of the timeline and the systems of anti-blackness, well, you'll learn and you'll see visual historical representations of those timeline things and events, such as, for example, December 8th, 1907, the first law from the state of Oklahoma as it becomes a state in 1907 is Jim Crow. To 1911 and the lynching of Laura Nelson and her son from Okemah, to 1916 when the city of Tulsa creates a law, an ordinance that makes it illegal for blacks and whites to live in the same community. Them and many other incidents of time that led to the chamber that I'm standing in now. The largest exhibit of all that is here is this chamber dedicated to the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Behind me you see representations of the brick buildings, and they're broken up obviously because of the destruction. But you'll see a video, you'll see a media, you'll hear voices speaking to you from the past. You'll hear authentic survivors' voices that were made available and for public to be able to hear for the last several years the Eddie Faye Gates collection that was held at the Oklahoma Historical Society, and now recently the family had those designated now to be held at the Gilcrease Museum. But you'll hear their voices speaking. Many people can go online now and view those recordings that were done, but you'll hear those recordings here. You'll hear the planes flying over. You'll sense the fact that May 31st was just another day in Greenwood. The Booker T. Washington High School was preparing for their homecoming. Life was just what life was, another day in this beautiful black economy and community of love and admiration and respect and professionalism. But we know by the end of that night, everything turned tragic, and you will experience that in this chamber. It's very heavy. It is quite gripping, quite emotional, quite visual, but honoring those who we built this place for, so that the world will see what mankind can do to their fellow mankind when emotions, when hatred, when racism goes unchecked. This is a visual experience so that none will have any excuse ever again to not know the truth of what happened here and experience it in a very narrative way. Again, designed by local projects, feedback from the community, and then excellently constructed and put together so that when you come here, you will see it, you will feel it, and you'll experience it. The 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre exhibit. After this experience, and after you've gone through and read the materials and seen the visuals, and you will get to take as much time as you need to absorb all that took place in that 16 to 18 hours, then we will leave out of this space and we'll go into that spirit of Greenwood, that spirit of Black Wall Street, of how they rebuilt their community. And that's where we go to next. And so we've come out of the Massacre exhibit in the chamber, but then you come in here and you see vibrant hope. You come into this space and you see and learn how this community rebuilt itself. You learn about the lawsuit that was filed by the well-known B.C. Franklin, the grandfather of John W. Franklin and the father of John Hope Franklin, that he stood against the racist policies that were put in place that made it illegal for black citizens to try to rebuild their homes and businesses. And he took it all the way to the Supreme Court and won. We talk about that history, that they immediately began to rebuild. By 1922, the first building was already back and in place, Williams Building, that you can see the cornerstone when you come down here to the famous and historic Greenwood Chamber Building at the corner of Greenwood and Archer. You can look at the top and see Williams, 1922. Within 5 years, all of Greenwood nearly is rebuilt. We talk about that. But we talk about the changing fortunes, how by 1943, the peak of the economic activity of Greenwood was bigger and better and nearly twice the size of what it was prior to the destruction. That's when you hear about over 1,200 black-owned homes, over 200 black-owned businesses, over 7 major grocery stores, over 3 major hospitals, all the restaurants and the jazz clubs and the haberdasheries, and the list goes on and on. How this community again said, we will not be moved and rebuilt. That is an incredible testament to that indomitable human spirit, the spirit of resilience that you will sense and you will see here. And so you'll experience that on this side, and when you walk on the other side, you will begin to see the decline. What happened again to Greenwood? And in 1967, 1968 was the building program, the urban renewal program of the Interstate 244 that split right through the heart of Greenwood. All of the black businesses and homes that were destroyed and uprooted by eminent domain. It took place all over the United States, actually. Those programs, urban renewal, black citizens have a colloquialism of urban renewal. They call it urban removal, because these programs always seem to find their way going through communities of color. And you can research this all over the country and see they always went through those communities. And that's what happened here to Greenwood. The death knell to Greenwood the second time was the forces behind building of highway programs. Then the impact of integration and how those the insular economy of Greenwood was destructed because people could then spend their money elsewhere and left the community. And then finally, in the 70s and 80s, black citizens, mom and pop shops who were dying out, had no one to pass their businesses down to, and so many businesses just closed up when their mom and pop shops, when they died, because their children left here. They left to go pursue careers outside of Oklahoma. They left the oppressive nature and the divisiveness here, the racial divisiveness, and so they became wealthy and left here and pursued their fortunes, got their college degrees, and they never came back home. So those three things, we actually go into a kind of a strong detail to give you an understanding of what happened to Greenwood the second time. So all of this history that you're going to experience, all this truth, this narrative historical experience leads to the final two chambers, the journey to reconciliation and a commitment room. And that's what we're going to go see now. This actually is the chamber that I'm most excited to present to the North Tulsa citizens, to the survivors and the descendant families, to the citizens of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the world, and that is the journey to racial reconciliation. This room, this space, this will be an amphitheater. You can see it's a half circle, and it's an amphitheater style room. Will fit about 45 to 50 people here, and after your tour, after your viewing of the history, it'll be a space where we can have programmatic discussion, to have some serious discussions about that difficult topic called race. Where do we go from here? The number of programs that we will host here to talk about the things that we're still dealing with in this country, that we're still dealing with in this city. For example, the number of programs, if Greenwood Rising was around today, the number of programs that we would have hosted in this space, a community meeting to talk about the aftermath of a George Floyd incident, a community meeting so that we can talk about the different opposing views and the emotions that are surrounding a Ahmaud Arbery shooting, a black man just running through a southern neighborhood through prejudices and biases. He's thought of as somebody that's maybe a person that's robbing homes in the neighborhood, and before the day is over with, he's murdered and killed. Even more personal than that, a place where we can talk about a community that's still trying to heal and find understanding from the shooting of a Terrence Crutcher, and how people are still looking for justice from that was done to not just a member of a family, a member of a community, but to an entire city, and how divisive those topics are. We've got to have a place, a safe space to have these discussions. This journey to reconciliation is difficult. It's filled with potholes, it's filled with bumps in the road, but discussions is how we get started on that journey. So we can start understanding, why do you feel the way you feel about people that are different than you? What is it that shaped the way you think? What did you hear at the kitchen table when you were a child and you heard grandmama or Meemaw and Pawpaw say about people who were different that stuck in your psyche, and then you heard that, and maybe you started to practice some of what you heard from your elders and what you were raised around, that showed up in how you treated people as you grew up. We all have these prejudices. We all have these biases, and we need to talk about them. Journey to reconciliation is going to be that place where we can start down that journey to racial understanding, to break down the devices and the divisions of that work, and start on that journey to racial reconciliation. After you leave this space, you will be invited to give a commitment in our commitment space before leaving. Let me show you that next. One quick thing I want to show you before we show you that commitment space is this hallway, as it's leading you back out to the main entry area, is our hallway that shows you the donors. All of the donors that contributed to building this history center. Our intent and goal was to make sure that it wasn't just the big names and the big corporate names and the big dollars. We've got to have that. I mean, this was a $18.6 million structure. You've got to have big partners with big resources to help you do something like this. But we also told the people that anybody who gives any amount of money, whether it's $15 or $25 or $50 or $100, your name's going on that wall, because we want the world to see that no matter what your financial resources were, you stood on the right side of history and said, I want to help be a part of building that program. So on this wall here will be a larger than life wall of names that will represent everyone who made a donation. And we'll be able to extend that as people continue to give. We'll be able to add to those names after we're open. And even on this wall, our significant donors, those that make it possible for us to build a center like this. And so this community hallway is really that, a community perspective of all those that helped us make this happen. And so now the final thing I want to show you is the commitment space room. Let's take a look at that. What you're looking at is the structure that's in place for what we will call the commitment chamber. This will be a digital wall, a room that will have light coming down and will give you this space within this area that surrounds me, that will allow you to, through a phone or a tablet or tablets that we will provide to you, you will be able to say, I make a commitment towards, and you fill in the space. In 30 words or less, things that you will do, a personal commitment to what you can do to change and help change racial relations in your own world, in your own family, on your job. Some examples might be, I commit to inviting someone to lunch at least once a week that doesn't look like me, that doesn't hang around in my circles, and let's go and just have conversation to start understanding our differences. I commit to changing my spheres of influence of people that I work with so that I can talk about and not be ashamed to talk about things that still divide us. I commit to, you make your own personal commitment that you will hold yourself to. Now, we have no way of knowing whether someone's going to actually follow through, but if we just get the conversation started, if we just plant some seeds and water those seeds, I think we'll be amazed to see what people start doing in their own lives when they leave here. The intention is to come here, see this history, but leave changed with a commitment to make differences in our community, in our lives, and in our world. I've said many times, we can change as many policies and laws and regulations on the books if you want to, but until we start to change, until we change the way people think about other people that are different from them, or change the way your heart, how you feel about other people, we're still going to be here 100 years later in this same position. And I think you'd have to be living under a rock to not know, just in the last few years, Greenwood Rising is needed now more than ever. So for those who lost their lives, for those who we commemorate this year for the Centennial, for those who are descendants of this Black Wall Street legacy, their wealth and their family wealth that was capped off and not passed down to them, this is going to be a place to honor them. This is going to be a place where we talk about what happened. And this will be a place when people leave here, they're going to ask questions. What are we doing for these people? And what are we going to do for this community as we move forward from here? Greenwood Rising. I can't wait till you see it. It's going to change you. I can't wait till we're completed. You've witnessed over the last few minutes kind of just the beforehand as the construction teams are completing. We plan to debut this during the week of the Centennial. On June the 2nd, we dedicate this building. And before we open it up to the general public, the families of the descendants and survivors, the North Tulsa community itself, we built this for your history. They will get to see this first, free of charge, for as many times as they need to view it before we open it up to the world to see. We're excited about this hard journey that we've been on, and we're honored to be able to memorialize and commemorate this history for children of the world to see, so that no one ever grows up and becomes an adult and says, I was never taught that when I was in school. It is our responsibility to pass this on to the next generation so that we never forget. A group of people who forget their past are destined to repeat it. And our North Star on the exterior of this building will be a quote by James Baldwin. And that quote says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." We're going to face this together. Greenwood Rising will do that. Can't wait to see you here in just a few short weeks from now. Greenwood Rising, Black Wall Street History Center. Thank you for your time.